Hello and welcome back. In this video we'll be taking a look at the hue saturation adjustment layer. And for this example I've opened up the jellyfish image that is included with Windows 7. The reason I chose this particular image is because it has a really harsh difference between areas of color, where we have the orange of the jellyfish, we have the blue of the water around it. And if you have any kind of a similar image you'll be able to really easily see what's going on, but you don't necessarily have to have this one. Now let's start off by applying a hue saturation layer. I'll do that by going to the adjustments panel and clicking down in the second row, second icon over, and there we have it. Now the purpose of the hue saturation adjustment layer is to adjust colors. It's another color adjustment layer, like everything on that second row in the adjustments panel. It can do this in a couple of different ways. It can colorize an entire image, which is kind of like desaturating the whole thing, removing all color data and then applying just one color to everything. Or it can take the individual channels of color and push those along the color wheel into a different realm of the spectrum. It can do this all at once or one color range at a time. Now if that sounds in any way confusing, let's just start playing with some of the settings and it'll come to you pretty quick. By default, well actually before we even worry about defaults, let's take a look up here at our presets. We have things like cyanotype, which will make everything kind of blue, like cyanotypes are. We have old style, we have red boost, yellow boost. You can play with these. I mean, there's even a sepia toned one, and that just switches over to colorize mode. We're going to leave this at default and take a look at our settings. The first thing you have is hue. This allows you to take the current mapping of your colors and kind of slide them around the color wheel. That's why this number goes from positive 180 to negative 180. You're just kind of rotating the mappings of the color wheel. And you can see that represented down below. As you slide this slider around, you'll notice that second little rainbow color wheel is starting to adjust. And if you're unsure of how to read that, if I pull this guy over to somewhere around negative 100, give or take, that means all of my greens have been mapped to reds, all of my blues, so here's my input at the top, have been mapped to greens, and we can see that. The blue water is now green. So if you just go from the top and look straight down to the bottom, you can see how all of the color mapping is being adjusted as we play with this slider. You can, of course, get some pretty outlandish values this way. Next we have saturation, and that's just going to take your colors and make them more intense or less intense, all the way down to completely black and white. As a quick aside to the audience, I do not recommend that you use this method to desaturate an image to black and white. There are far better methods available, such as the black and white adjustment layer. And of course you can push that way too far and your colors start to clip and look, well, generally scary and terrible. Now we also have access to lightness, so you can darken your image or lighten it as you see fit. Obviously subtlety is going to be key here, just the smallest of adjustments here and there. Now let's switch this back over to default. Currently, I've been adjusting these settings with my master channel, meaning it's affecting all colors across the entire image, but you don't necessarily have to work that way. You can, for example, adjust just single color ranges inside your image. So if I grab, say, the blues and start sliding my hue slider, check out what's happening. Only the blue colors are updating. Notice my jellyfish is pretty much staying the same color that it was. Any adjustments that you may see are those areas where maybe there's a little bit of blue bleeding through his body. But we could, for instance, make the water around him purple. We could desaturate it just a little bit. And it's not the most realistic result, but it does allow us to change the color of certain things on a color-by-color basis, which is extremely handy. Now, if we don't want to have to choose a specific color from the list, so another very cool thing we have is the ability to do this right inside the image. We can click and drag to change the saturation of any given color, or we can control drag, and that's because I'm on Windows, I believe, well, it should still be the control key on a Mac, to change the hue. Sorry, I totally lost track of where I was for like 4 seconds there. So if I click and drag out here in the blue, notice as I drag to the left, I'm desaturating the blue all the way to black and white. I can drag to the right and I can push that blue all the way up into super crazy land. Also notice that as I clicked and dragged in that area, the adjustment layer already said, oh, check this out, you're adjusting the blues. It knew what I was doing. And if you don't believe me, let's go back over to default. I'll switch this over to master, and as soon as I click, it recognizes that I'm looking at blues. If I click over here, it now knows that I'm adjusting yellows. So you can go area by area and adjust individual ranges of color. Also, you can hold down Control and drag, and now you can adjust the hue. So if we don't want our water to be blue, we can just move out there to that area, hold down Control, and drag left and right and slide along the spectrum. Now let me switch this back to default. Once you choose a color range that you want to adjust, you can control how far that range spreads into neighboring spectra. So for instance, I've switched back over to default. Let's go ahead and turn off our little hand arrow guy here. And I can have this set to master, but if I switch this to blue, take a look at what happens here in my little output area. We have this little zone which allows us to control the total spectrum that's being adjusted. So everything within this gray area is what is being adjusted here in the outputs. So we can expand that out, and now we're also adjusting a little bit of cyan and a little bit of violet as well. That's by dragging those two little white bars, right? Now we have a fall off that we can adjust as well. So we can increase the amount of fall off outside that spectra. And then if we click and drag in the gray area, we can basically control how, which color we're adjusting right now. Now if I leave this over here with blues, we're still adjusting blues. If I drag it over underneath the red section, you'll notice this updates to show reds. So we'll go ahead and leave this back up underneath blues like it was. And now, again, all this is doing is showing us what areas of color are going to be affected by this layer. So now as I adjust my hue slider, we're only adjusting our blues. If I do something kind of wacky, like really increase that range so that it also includes oranges and reds, now as I slide, blues and oranges are being adjusted. So you can actually see the jellyfish changing color as well. So again, it's just a way for you to control how much of the spectrum of your original image is being adjusted by this by the adjustment layer. That's really all there is to it. You can add and take away from that selection using your eyedroppers as well. So if you don't want to have to choose from a list and you don't want to have to click with your arrow, you can, let me go ahead and set this back over to default to reset everything. You can grab your eyedropper and just click, like say out here in the blues, and say, I want to adjust the blues. And it automatically sets that up. Now just to illustrate, let me set this back over to master. I'm sorry, let me go, we'll start with blues, and then here's where I'm adjusting for starters, and then I can add to that. And notice, as I click other areas, if you look really closely at my little spectrum here, it is increasing. Now, most of all of this blue is kind of the same color, so we're not seeing much of an increase, but watch what happens if I click in the orange of the jellyfish. Suddenly, we're adding on a much wider range of colors. Now, if I didn't want to do that, I can click on the little subtraction sign, and I can start taking away shades that I didn't want to affect. So we can remove out those reds. And it's going to be a lot easier to see the result if we go ahead and just bump the hue into something crazy. And if we see something change that we didn't want to change, say this little portion here inside the jellyfish, then we can take that away. Or if we did want to see that change, we can add that. And you see that get updated as well. So again, it's just a way to control what areas or what color ranges of your image are being affected by this adjustment. Now finally, all of this, everything I've shown you so far, is just one of the ways in which the hue saturation adjustment layer works, which is just pushing those hues around the color wheel, adjusting the overall amount of saturation and lightness as you see fit. But that's not all you can do. You can also colorize an image. And basically what this means is you switch on the colorize checkbox, and it's kind of like taking your entire image and pushing it to black and white and then applying a single color to it. It's very straightforward. Once you switch on colorize, you simply choose the hue that you want your image to be by dragging along the hue slider, and then you adjust your saturation accordingly. So if you know that you want something vaguely sepia toned, you can switch over to kind of an orangish, brownish color, pull back your saturation, you probably won't need to adjust your lightness too much, and there you go. You have kind of a sepia tone result, or something a bit more like a cyanotype. Very easy to do, and if you know that you need something like a single color image and you want to handle it really quickly, this is a really nice way to go about it. It's not the only way. Generally, I find myself wanting to combine something like this with a black and white adjustment layer, so I have full control over what's going to be pushed to blacks and what's going to be pushed to whites, but that's something that is covered in a separate video. So that is a rundown of the hue saturation adjustment layer. That will wrap things up for this video. Thank you very much for watching.